Picture this. Your own father throws you out of Thanksgiving dinner in front of the entire family. They're all laughing, treating you like some pathetic failure, completely unaware that you just pocketed $58 million from selling your company. But when I blocked their business accounts, the look of sheer panic on their faces became a moment I'll never forget. This isn't just a story about family betrayal. It's about the sweetest revenge imaginable. When the power finally shifts into your hands. My name is Rachel Monroe, and for 34 years, I've been the disappointment in a family that prizes appearances above everything else. Growing up in our pristine colonial house in suburban Ohio, you'd think we were the perfect American family. Dad, Douglas Monroe, ran Monroe Insurance with the kind of authoritative confidence that made neighbors respect him at neighborhood barbecues. Mom, Patricia, kept our home magazine worthy and our social calendar full. From the outside, we had it all. But inside those perfectly painted walls, I learned early that love came with conditions, and I was failing to meet most of them. Douglas Monroe didn't just run a business, he orchestrated our entire family like a corporate hierarchy. At the top sat my older brother Andrew, the golden child who could do no wrong. 2 years my senior. Andrew embodied everything Dad wanted in an air-sharp business instincts, natural charisma, and an unshakable confidence that made clients trust him with their life savings. Dad would beam with pride whenever Andrew walked into a room, already envisioning the day he'd hand over the family business to his worthy successor. Then there was my younger sister Lily, the sweet kindergarten teacher who chose a respectable profession that looked good at church functions. Dad might not have seen teaching as particularly ambitious, but at least it was stable, traditional, and socially acceptable. And then there was me, the black sheep who couldn't seem to find her place in Dad's carefully constructed world. While Andrew was learning the insurance business during summer breaks, I was hunched over our family computer, teaching myself to code. While Lily was studying education at the local state university, I was devouring everything I could about cybersecurity and digital privacy. But to Dad, my passion for technology wasn't a legitimate career path. It was an expensive hobby that would eventually fizzle out when I came to my senses. Rachel's going through another one of her phases. He'd tell relatives at family gatherings, that dismissive chuckle punctuating his words. All this computer nonsense. She'll find something practical eventually. The worst part wasn't just the dismissal. It was watching him light up whenever Andrew entered the room. Dad would straighten his shoulders, his voice would gain warmth and authority, and suddenly he became the father I desperately wanted him to be with me. They'd discuss market trends, client strategies, and business expansion plans while I sat there invisible, my latest coding project or cybersecurity article dismissed before I could even share it. Dreamy idealism. Dad called my interests. Pie in the sky thinking that won't pay the bills. Mom knew better than to contradict him. Patricia Monroe had learned long ago that keeping the peace meant supporting her husband's opinions, even when they crushed their daughter's spirit. She'd give me sympathetic looks across the dinner table when Dad launched into another lecture about realistic career expectations, but she never once spoke up in my defense. The family dynamics became crystal clear during my senior year of high school. Andrew was already being groomed to take over Monroe Insurance, attending client meetings and learning the ropes. Dad would brag to anyone who'd listen about his son's natural business acumen and leadership potential. Meanwhile, when I announced my intention to study computer science, the reaction was swift and brutal. "Absolutely not," Dad declared over Sunday dinner. "I'm not paying $40,000 a year for you to play video games and waste time on computers. You'll study something practical, business administration, maybe accounting, something that will actually prepare you for the real world." That night, lying in my childhood bedroom surrounded by programming books I'd bought with my part-time job money, I made a decision that would define the rest of my life. If Dad couldn't see my potential, I'd prove it without his support. If he wanted to write me off as the family failure, I'd show him exactly what that failure could accomplish. But first, I had to survive 4 more years under his roof, watching Andrew bask in paternal approval while I counted down the days until I could escape and build something that would make Douglas Monroe choke on his dismissive words. The irony is almost poetic now. The man who built his entire career on protecting people from unforeseen risks never saw the biggest threat coming from his own dinner table. The day I turned 22, I made the hardest decision of my life. I was leaving Ohio, and I was never coming back to beg for Douglas Monroe's approval again. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life," Dad said, standing in our front hallway as I loaded my beat-up Honda Civic with everything I owned. "When this computer fantasy falls apart, don't expect me to bail you out." "I won't need you to," I replied, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Mom cried quietly by the window, but she didn't say a word. Andrew wasn't even there. He was at the office, learning the family business that would never be mine anyway. Only Lily hugged me goodbye, whispering that she believed in me even if nobody else did. I drove away from that perfect suburban house with $800 in my checking account, a computer science degree I'd earned while working nights at a local diner, and absolutely no safety net. The fear was overwhelming, but it was nothing compared to the suffocating weight of living under Dad's constant disappointment. My destination was Columbus, close enough that I could still visit Mom and Lily, but far enough that I wouldn't be tempted to crawl back home when things got tough. And things got tough immediately. My first apartment was a studio in a converted warehouse that smelled like mold and had questionable electrical wiring. The rent was $450 a month, which left me with barely enough for ramen noodles and gas money. But it was mine, and for the first time in my life, nobody was telling me that my dreams were worthless. I landed a job at a small IT consulting firm called TechFlow Solutions, making $32,000 a year fixing network problems for local businesses. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave me real-world experience with cybersecurity issues. Every night after my 10-hour shifts, I'd come home to my cramped studio and work on my own projects until 2 or 3 in the morning, fueled by cheap coffee and pure determination. That's when I started developing the early concepts that would eventually become Privasec. I noticed how vulnerable most small businesses were to cyber attacks, how their communications were essentially wide open to anyone who knew how to look. But existing security solutions were either too expensive or too complicated for companies without dedicated IT departments. The loneliness was the hardest part. Working 16-hour days didn't leave much time for socializing, and my co-workers at TechFlow were nice enough but didn't share my obsession with revolutionizing digital privacy. I'd call Mom every Sunday, carefully avoiding any mention of Dad or how I was barely scraping by. She'd update me on Andrew's latest promotion at Monroe Insurance and Lily's teaching career, and I'd pretend to be thriving in my new life. The breakthrough came during my second year in Columbus, when I met Elena Torres at a cybersecurity meetup downtown. She was a brilliant systems architect who'd just left her corporate job, frustrated by the same problems I was trying to solve. Elena had the technical expertise I lacked, and I had the business vision that excited her. Over coffee that stretched until midnight, we outlined what would become our life's work. "We're not just building another security platform," Elena said, her eyes bright with possibility. "We're democratizing privacy, making it accessible to everyone, not just Fortune 500 companies." We shook hands that night. 2 broke women in their 20s who thought they could take on tech giants with nothing but borrowed laptops and a shared belief that privacy was a fundamental right, not a luxury good. Our first office was my studio apartment. Elena would arrive every morning at 6:30, and we'd work until exhaustion forced us to stop. We survived on dollar store pasta and the occasional pizza when we landed a small freelance contract. Our business plan was written on napkins and optimism. Our market research conducted through late-night conversations with small business owners who were desperate for affordable security solutions. The rejections started almost immediately. Every investor we pitched looked at 2 young women with no corporate pedigree and barely concealed their skepticism. "Interesting concept," they'd say, "but cybersecurity is a very competitive field. What makes you think you can succeed where established companies haven't?" We burned through our savings in the first 6 months. Elena moved in with me to cut costs, sleeping on an air mattress in the corner of my studio. We canceled our phones and relied on public Wi-Fi. There were nights when we'd split a single can of soup for dinner and tell ourselves we were building something revolutionary. The lowest point came during month 8, when our last potential investor pulled out after promising funding for weeks. We had $17 between us and rent was due in 3 days. I remember sitting on my mattress on the floor, staring at my laptop screen, wondering if Dad had been right all along. But Elena looked at me with fierce determination and said, "We're not quitting now. We're too close to something amazing." She was right. We were building something that would change everything, even if we couldn't see it yet through our exhaustion and empty bank accounts. The turning point came at 3:15 in the morning on a Tuesday in March, during our 9th month of barely surviving. Elena and I were debugging our encryption protocol when she suddenly stopped typing and turned to me with wide eyes. "Rachel, I think we just solved it." What we'd created wasn't just another security platform. It was a complete communication ecosystem that made military-grade encryption as simple as sending a text message. Privacy could protect everything from small business emails to multinational corporate communications, with an interface so intuitive that my 60-year-old neighbor could use it without training. Our first beta users were local businesses I'd met through my TechFlow contracts: a family-owned accounting firm, a boutique marketing agency, a small law practice, companies that handled sensitive information but couldn't afford enterprise-level security solutions. Within weeks, word started spreading through Columbus's tight-knit business community. "So this changes everything," said Marcus Peterson, owner of Peterson and Associates Legal Services. "For the first time, we can actually protect our client communications without breaking our budget or hiring a full-time IT department." But the real validation came from an unexpected source. TechCrunch picked up our story after a freelance journalist attended one of our local presentations. The article, titled "Two Women in Ohio Are Quietly Revolutionizing Cybersecurity," brought our first flood of national attention. My phone started ringing at 6:30 that morning. Elena and I stared at each other across our cramped studio as call after call came in: reporters, potential clients, and most importantly, investors who suddenly wanted to hear our pitch. Within 6 months, we'd grown from 2 women sharing a studio apartment to a team of 12 working out of a converted warehouse space. Our user base exploded from hundreds to thousands, then tens of thousands. Small businesses across America were discovering that they could finally afford enterprise-level security, and larger corporations began taking notice of our innovative approach. The growth was intoxicating but terrifying. We were working 18-hour days, making decisions that affected thousands of users, managing employees for the first time in our lives. There were moments when I'd wake up in a panic, convinced we were in over our heads and everything would collapse. But Elena kept us grounded. "Remember why we started this," she'd say during our weekly strategy meetings. "We're not just building a company, we're giving people their privacy back." By year 2, Privasec had over 2 million users. We'd raised our first serious round of funding, moved into a proper office space, and started getting recognition from industry publications. Cybersecurity Today named us Startup of the Year. Forbes included us in their Companies to Watch list. The irony wasn't lost on me. While I was building something that tech giants were starting to notice, my own family still had no idea what I was actually doing. My Sunday calls with Mom had become carefully choreographed performances where I'd mention work is going well without revealing that my company was being discussed in boardrooms from Silicon Valley to Wall Street. Year 3 brought the kind of growth that felt surreal. We crossed 5 million users, then 10 million. Our revenue jumped from thousands to millions. Major corporations started approaching us for enterprise solutions. And suddenly we were competing directly with companies I'd once thought were untouchable. The acquisition offers started coming in year 4. Tech giants who'd initially dismissed us as just another startup were now offering serious money for what we'd built. But Elena and I weren't ready to sell. We were having too much fun disrupting an industry that had ignored small businesses for decades. Then came the offer that changed everything. It was a Thursday afternoon when our lawyers called with news that made my hands shake. Quantum Dynamics, one of the largest tech conglomerates in the world, had submitted a formal acquisition proposal that made me read the number 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. $58 million. For a company that had started with $800 and a dream, it was more money than I'd ever imagined possible. But more than the money, it was validation, proof that the computer fantasy Dad had mocked was now worth more than Monroe Insurance would probably see in a lifetime. Elena and I spent weeks going over the terms, the implications, the future of everything we'd built. Quantum Dynamics wanted to integrate Privasec into their existing security suite while keeping our team intact and our mission unchanged. They understood what we'd created and wanted to scale it globally. The day we signed the papers, sitting in a conference room 50 floors above downtown Columbus, I thought about calling Dad to share the news. For about 30 seconds, I imagined his reaction, the pride that might finally creep into his voice. But then I remembered 8 years of dismissive comments, of being treated like the family failure, of watching him beam with pride for Andrew's much smaller accomplishments. I realized I didn't need his validation anymore. I'd found something much more valuable. I'd found proof that I was right, and he was completely, catastrophically wrong. The acquisition announcement hit tech blogs the next morning. Privasec, the little startup from Ohio, had just been purchased for $58 million by one of the biggest names in technology. My phone exploded with congratulations from colleagues, former classmates, and business contacts, but I didn't call home. Not yet. The call came 3 weeks after the acquisition announcement. On a crisp November afternoon while I was cleaning out my office at Privasec's headquarters, Mom's name appeared on my phone screen, and for a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail like I had with the dozen other calls from Ohio numbers I didn't recognize. Rachel, honey. Mom's voice was warm but tentative, the way it always sounded when she was about to ask for something Dad had put her up to. I hope you're doing well. I've been thinking about you so much lately. Hi, Mom, I'm good. Really good, actually. There was a pause, and I could practically hear her gathering courage for whatever script Dad had given her. Well, that's wonderful to hear. Listen, sweetie, Thanksgiving is next week, and your father and I were hoping... Well, we were wondering if you might want to come home for dinner. It's been so long since we've all been together. The invitation hit me like a physical blow. 8 years. 8 years of building a company, revolutionizing an industry, and proving every one of Dad's dismissive predictions wrong. And now they wanted me back for turkey and small talk. The whole family will be there, Mom continued, her voice gaining false brightness. Andrew's bringing his new girlfriend. She's lovely, works in marketing for some big firm downtown. And Lily's been asking about you constantly. She misses her big sister. I stared out my office window at the Columbus skyline, weighing my options. Part of me wanted to decline politely, to continue my new life without looking back. But another part, the part that had spent years craving Dad's approval, was curious to see how this would play out. Who else is coming? I asked. Oh, the usual crowd. Uncle Jim and Aunt Sarah, the Hendersons from next door, a few families from church. You know how your father likes to host. She paused. He's been asking about you, Rachel. I think he'd really like to see you. The lie was so transparent it was almost endearing. Douglas Monroe asking about me. The same man who hadn't called once in 8 years, who'd dismissed my career as a computer fantasy. But I found myself saying yes anyway, driven by a curiosity I couldn't quite name. Okay, Mom, I'll be there. Oh, wonderful dinners at 2 o'clock on Thursday. Nothing fancy, just family. Another pause. It'll be so good to have you home, sweetheart. After hanging up, I sat in my empty office for a long time, wondering what exactly I was walking into. The rational part of my brain knew this was probably a mistake. Dad hadn't suddenly become a different person, and Mom's invitation felt orchestrated rather than organic. But maybe that was exactly why I needed to go, to see how much I'd changed, how little their opinions mattered to me now. The drive from Columbus to my childhood home took exactly 2 hours and 17 minutes, the same route I'd taken countless times as a teenager desperate to escape. But this time, I was driving a Tesla Model S instead of my beaten-up Honda, wearing a designer coat instead of thrift store finds, and carrying myself with a confidence that 8 years of success had built brick by brick. The Monroe family house looked exactly the same, pristine colonial architecture, perfectly manicured lawn, and the kind of curb appeal that made neighbors envious. Dad's BMW sat in the driveway next to Mom's Lexus, both vehicles I now realized I could buy without checking my bank account. I parked on the street and sat for a moment, watching through the front windows as figures moved around inside. The dining room was already set with Mom's good china, and I could see the warm glow of candles that meant she'd gone all out for this reunion. Taking a deep breath, I walked up the front steps I'd last descended 8 years ago with all my possessions in garbage bags, wondering if Dad would even recognize the woman I'd become. Mom answered the door before I could knock, pulling me into a hug that smelled like her familiar perfume and the turkey already roasting in the oven. "Rachel, you look amazing, honey. So sophisticated." "Thanks, Mom. You look great too." Dad appeared behind her, looking older but still carrying himself with that authoritative bearing I remembered. His eyes swept over me, taking in my expensive clothes and confident posture, and I saw a flicker of something, surprise, maybe, or confusion. "Rachel," he said simply, extending his hand for a formal shake. Not a hug, not a smile, just the kind of greeting he'd give a business acquaintance. "Dad?" The house was already filling with guests, the familiar chaos of a Monroe family Thanksgiving in full swing. Uncle Jim was holding court by the fireplace. Aunt Sarah was helping Mom in the kitchen, and I could hear Andrew's voice from the living room, probably regaling someone with stories about his latest business triumph. As I hung my coat in the front closet, I noticed several people stealing glances at me, whispering among themselves. 8 years was a long time to be absent from family gatherings, and I could see the curiosity in their eyes as they tried to reconcile the successful-looking woman before them with the family failure who'd stormed out years ago. This was going to be interesting. Dinner was a carefully orchestrated performance, and I had the worst seat in the house. Dad positioned himself at the head of the table like a king holding court, with Mom to his right and Andrew, the crown prince, to his left. Andrew's girlfriend, Jessica, sat beside him, looking appropriately impressed by everything Monroe-related. Lily gave me genuine smiles from across the table, but even she seemed nervous about how this reunion might unfold. The supporting cast filled out the rest of the dining room: Uncle Jim and Aunt Sarah, the Hendersons from next door, and the Clarks from church, all longtime family friends who remembered me as the rebellious daughter who'd run off to play with computers. "So, Andrew," Dad began, carving the turkey with ceremonial precision, "tell everyone about that Henderson account you closed last week." Andrew straightened in his chair, clearly prepared for this moment. "Well, it was a challenging negotiation. Henderson Manufacturing was considering switching to State Farm, but I managed to restructure their entire package: liability, property, workers' comp, and saved them $30,000 annually while increasing their coverage." Dad beamed with paternal pride. "That's my boy. Natural instincts for the business. Andrew's been Monroe Insurance's top performer 3 years running now." The table erupted in polite applause and congratulations. Jessica squeezed Andrew's hand adoringly. "He's so good at what he does," she gushed. "The dedication, the late nights, it's really inspiring." "And what about you, Jessica?" Mom asked. "Andrew tells us you work in marketing." "Digital marketing for Pinnacle Brands downtown. We handle social media strategies, online advertising campaigns, brand positioning, really exciting stuff in today's market." More nods of approval around the table. Digital marketing was apparently acceptable now, unlike whatever I'd been doing for the past 8 years. "And Lily," Dad continued, "how are your little students this year?" Lily launched into stories about her kindergarten class, how she was helping kids learn to read. the Christmas play they were preparing. Dad listened with genuine warmth, the kind of attention he'd never given my achievements. The conversation flowed easily around me, as if I were a stranger who'd wandered into their family gathering by accident. I picked at my turkey and watched the Monroe family dynamic play out exactly as it had for decades. Dad as the benevolent patriarch, Andrew as the successful heir, Lily as the sweet daughter making socially acceptable choices. Finally, Uncle Jim turned to me with the kind of forced enthusiasm people use when they remember they've been ignoring someone. "And Rachel, we haven't heard about your adventures yet. Still doing the computer thing." The table fell silent. Every fork paused mid-air. Every conversation stopped. All eyes turned to me, waiting for the prodigal daughter to account for her years in exile. "Something like that," I said quietly. Dad set down his carving knife and leaned back in his chair, that familiar smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Come now, Rachel, don't be modest. Tell everyone about your little startup. What was it called again?" His tone made it clear he'd done some research, probably after Mom told him I was coming, but his delivery suggested he found whatever he'd learned amusing rather than impressive. "Privasec," I said. "Right, Privasec. Some kind of computer security thing." Dad's voice carried that condescending edge I remembered so well. "How's that working out for you? Still got big dreams about changing the world." The Hendersons chuckled politely. Jessica looked confused, probably wondering why the conversation had suddenly turned tense. Even Lily shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "We have about 25 million users now," I said simply. Dad's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. 25 million! Well, that sounds impressive. Though I suppose on the internet, numbers can mean anything, can't they? How many of those are actually paying customers? He was baiting me, trying to expose what he assumed were inflated claims. The old Rachel would have gotten defensive, would have tried to explain and justify. But 8 years of building a real company had taught me the power of letting facts speak for themselves. "Most of them," I replied. "Enterprise clients pay more, obviously." Of course. Dad picked up his wine glass and took a deliberate sip. "Though I have to ask, if this computer business is so successful, why are you still driving that old Honda, still living like a college student?" The silence around the table became deafening. Mom's face flushed with embarrassment. Andrew looked down at his plate, probably remembering his own struggles starting out in the family business. "I'm not driving a Honda anymore," I said quietly. "No, well, that's progress, I suppose. What are you driving now?" This was it. The moment I'd been unconsciously preparing for since the day I left home. Dad wanted to expose me as a failure in front of his audience, wanted to prove that his dismissal of my dreams had been justified all along. I set down my fork and looked directly at him. "I sold the company 3 weeks ago. Dad, $58 million. The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. Uncle Jim's fork clattered against his plate. Jessica's mouth fell open. Even Andrew looked up sharply, his confident demeanor cracking for the first time all evening. But Dad just stared at me, his wine glass frozen halfway to his lips, as if he was trying to process a sentence that didn't make sense in his carefully ordered world. "The bitter truth is," I continued, my voice steady and clear, "I knew that even if I became the most successful person in this room, you'd still find a way to make me feel like a failure, because this was never really about success, was it, Dad? This was about control." Dad's wine glass hit the table so hard I thought it might shatter. His face had gone from surprised to red to something approaching purple, and when he spoke, his voice carried the kind of controlled fury I remembered from my teenage years. "Get out!" The words cut through the dining room like a blade. Mom gasped audibly. Lily's eyes went wide with shock. Even Uncle Jim, who'd seen plenty of Monroe family drama over the years, looked stunned by the sudden escalation. "Douglas," Mom whispered, reaching for his arm. "Please, it's Thanksgiving." "I said get out!" Dad's voice exploded across the table, causing Jessica to actually flinch backward. I will not sit here and listen to lies and fantasies from someone who thinks she can waltz back into this house and disrespect everything I've built. Andrew finally found his voice. Dad, maybe we should just... Saw $58 million. Dad stood up so abruptly his chair scraped against the hardwood floor. You expect us to believe that fairy tale you think we're all idiots here, Rachel, that we can't see through your pathetic attempt to impress us with made-up numbers. The entire table sat frozen, forks suspended, conversations died mid-sentence. This was supposed to be a family reunion, but it felt more like a public execution. I've watched you struggle for 8 years, Dad continued, pacing behind his chair now like a prosecutor addressing a jury. Living in that terrible apartment, working for peanuts, chasing dreams that any sensible person would have abandoned long ago. And now you want us to believe you're some kind of millionaire, that your little computer game actually amounted to something. I stood up slowly, my hands remarkably steady as I placed my napkin on the table. 8 years ago, this scene would have destroyed me. I would have cried, begged for forgiveness, promised to be more realistic about my future. But the woman standing in this dining room wasn't the broken girl who'd left. You're right about one thing, I said, my voice cutting through his tirade. I don't expect you to believe it. You've never believed in me. So why start now? Because it's ridiculous. Dad slammed his palm on the table, making the good china rattle. You want to know what I think happened? I think you heard Andrew was doing well, heard about his success with Monroe Insurance, and you got jealous. So you made up this elaborate story to try to one-up him. Typical Rachel. Always competing, always trying to prove she's special when she's just... Well, when she's just what? Dad. My voice was dangerously quiet now. When she's just the daughter who embarrassed you, the one who didn't follow your plan, the one who dared to think she could build something bigger than Monroe Insurance. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom was crying silently into her napkin. Lily looked like she wanted to disappear under the table. The guests were staring at their plates, probably wishing they'd stayed home. Dad's face was stone now, his eyes cold and dismissive. You're delusional, Rachel. You always have been, living in some fantasy world where you're the hero of your own story. Well, here's reality. You're 34 years old, you're alone, and you're still the same confused little girl who ran away from home because she couldn't handle the truth about herself. That's when something inside me finally snapped, not with anger, but with a kind of crystalline clarity that felt almost peaceful. You know what, Dad? You're absolutely right. I am delusional. I was delusional enough to think that maybe, after 8 years, you might have grown into the father I needed. I was delusional enough to believe that my success might actually matter to you more than your need to be right about everything. I walked around the table toward the front door, every eye following my movement. At the doorway to the dining room, I turned back one last time. Enjoy your dinner. Enjoy celebrating Andrew's $30,000 insurance deal. And when you see the news reports next week confirming everything I just told you, remember this moment. Remember how it felt to be so determined to tear me down that you couldn't recognize success when it was sitting right across from you. I grabbed my coat from the front closet and walked out of that house for the second time in my life. But this time I wasn't running away. I was walking toward something bigger than Douglas Monroe could ever understand. Behind me, I could hear muffled voices, Mom crying, someone trying to calm Dad down, chairs scraping as people probably excused themselves from the most uncomfortable Thanksgiving dinner in Monroe family history. But I didn't look back. I had better things to do than watch my father's world start to crumble. The game was about to change, and for the first time in my life, I was the one holding all the cards. 3 days later, every major tech publication in the country ran the story. TechCrunch, Wired, Forbes, The Wall Street Journal, all confirming what the Monroe family had dismissed as fantasy. Privasec, founded by Rachel Monroe of Ohio, had indeed been acquired by Quantum Dynamics for $58 million. My phone exploded with messages from relatives, old high school friends, and people I'd forgotten I even knew. But the calls I was really waiting for never came. Not from Dad, not from Andrew, not even from Mom. Radio silence from the people who should have been celebrating with me. That's when I realized the most beautiful part of my revenge was just beginning. The discovery came by pure accident, 2 weeks after the media storm had died down. I was reviewing Privasek's client database for the transition to Quantum Dynamics when a familiar name caught my eye in the Enterprise Accounts section. Monroe Insurance Group, annual subscription, premium security package, active since 2019. My hands froze over the keyboard. Dad's company had been using my platform for over 4 years. Curious now? I dug deeper into our corporate client records. There it was again, Midwest Financial Partners, Andrew's investment firm, also a longtime subscriber. They'd been paying us monthly for encrypted communications, secure file transfers, and protected client data storage since 2020. The irony was so perfect it almost felt scripted. While Dad was dismissing my work as computer fantasies, and Andrew was building his career on legitimate financial success, both of their companies had been completely dependent on the very technology they'd mocked at that Thanksgiving dinner. I called Elena, who was now serving as Privasek's transition coordinator with Quantum Dynamics. Elena, I need you to pull the detailed usage reports for 2 specific enterprise accounts, I said, trying to keep my voice professional despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Sure thing. Which ones? Monroe Insurance Group and Midwest Financial Partners. There was a pause. Isn't Monroe your family name? Just pull the reports. I'll explain later. The data Elena sent me an hour later was even more damning than I'd hoped. Monroe Insurance processed all their client communications through Privatek, including sensitive policy information, claim details, and internal corporate emails. Andrew's firm was even more dependent. Their entire client portfolio management system ran through our encrypted servers. Without Privatek, both companies would lose their ability to securely communicate with clients, process confidential financial data, or maintain compliance with industry security standards. They weren't just customers. They were completely reliant on us. The plan formed itself in my mind with crystalline clarity. I spent the next day crafting what would be the most satisfying email of my professional career, not to Dad or Andrew directly. That would have been too obvious. Instead, I contacted David Park, Privasek's head of enterprise services, with very specific instructions. David, I need you to flag 2 accounts for immediate service review due to payment irregularities. Don't suspend them yet. Just initiate the standard 72-hour review process. Send the notification emails directly to the primary account holders. Payment irregularities. David sounded confused. But these accounts are current on all payments. Trust me on this one. It's a corporate restructuring issue related to the Quantum acquisition. Just follow standard protocol. Notify them that service may be temporarily interrupted pending review, and include my direct contact information for resolution. The beauty of the plan was its legitimacy. During major acquisitions, enterprise clients often faced service reviews and account restructuring. Nothing I was doing violated any policies or contracts. I was simply ensuring that Dad and Andrew understood exactly how their businesses operated in the real world. The first call came at 8:47 that evening. Andrew's name appeared on my phone screen, and I let it ring 4 times before answering. Rachel, thank God. I got this email about our Privatek account being flagged for review. They're saying our service might be suspended pending some kind of payment investigation. Is this a mistake? His voice carried a panic I'd never heard before, not during family dinners, not during his confident presentations about insurance deals. This was the sound of a man whose business was about to collapse. It's not a mistake, I said simply. It's part of the acquisition transition. All enterprise accounts are being reviewed. But we can't afford any interruption in service. Rachel, you don't understand. We process all our client communications through Privatek. If we lose access even for a day, It could destroy our compliance status. We could lose our license. That does sound serious. Can you fix this, I mean? Can you make sure our account doesn't get flagged? As a family favor. Family favor. The words hung in the air between us like a bad joke. I'll see what I can do, I said. But these acquisition reviews can be complicated. Sometimes they require direct intervention from account holders. The second call came 20 minutes later. Dad's name on my screen sent a jolt of satisfaction through my chest. Rachel! His voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the underlying tension. I received a concerning email about our Privasec account. Dad, how nice to hear from you. This isn't a social call. Monroe Insurance needs this issue resolved immediately. We have regulatory obligations, client confidentiality requirements. If our secure communication system goes down, it could cost us everything we've built. I can imagine that would be stressful. Don't play games with me. Rachel, I know you have influence with this company. I need you to fix this. Actually, Dad, I don't just have influence with Privasec. I founded it. I built every system your company depends on. The platform that's kept Monroe Insurance compliant and competitive for the past 4 years, that was my computer fantasy. The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. We need to meet, he said finally. Tonight. Tomorrow evening works better for me. 7 o'clock at Meridian downtown. Make a reservation for 3, you, Andrew, and me. We have a lot to discuss. I hung up before he could respond, my heart pounding with anticipation. For the first time in my life, Douglas Monroe needed something from me, and I was going to make sure he understood exactly what that meant. They were already seated when I arrived at Meridian, looking like defendants waiting for their sentencing. Dad wore his best suit, the navy one he reserved for important client meetings. Andrew fidgeted with his phone, probably calculating how much money his firm was losing with each hour of uncertainty. Both of them stood when I approached the table, a courtesy they'd never shown me in 34 years. Rachel, Dad said, his voice carefully modulated to sound warm. You look wonderful, really successful. I slid into my chair across from them, noting how they'd chosen seats that put them on the same side, united front against the family rebel who'd somehow gained the upper hand. Thank you for meeting us, Andrew added, his usual confidence replaced by nervous energy. I know this acquisition transition must be incredibly stressful for you, managing all these account reviews, dealing with corporate bureaucracy. Their sudden politeness was almost insulting. These were the same men who'd spent decades treating me like an inconvenient afterthought, and now they were offering sympathy for my stress. It's been manageable, I said, opening my menu as if this were a casual family dinner, though some accounts do require more attention than others. Dad leaned forward, unable to maintain the pleasantries any longer. Rachel, let's cut to the chase. We need our Privasec accounts restored immediately. Monroe Insurance has 43 business-critical processes that depend on your platform. Andrew's firm manages over $200 million in client assets through your systems. Any prolonged interruption could be catastrophic. That does sound complicated, I agreed, not looking up from my menu. The integration with quantum dynamics has created some complex compliance issues. Some accounts might need to accept new terms of service, updated security protocols, revised access permissions? Andrew shifted uncomfortably. What kind of revised access permissions? I finally looked up, meeting both their gazes directly. Well, for instance, Quantum has implemented new policies about account management oversight. Enterprise clients might find their administrative privileges restricted, their access monitored more closely, their service subject to periodic review at the platform owner's discretion. The color drained from Dad's face. You're talking about taking control of our systems. I'm talking about the reality of how modern business works. Dad, companies depend on technology platforms they don't own or control. It's fascinating how vulnerable that makes them, isn't it? This is blackmail, Dad said, his voice low and dangerous. No, this is business. This is the free market you've always preached about. Supply and demand, leverage and negotiation, winners and losers. I leaned back in my chair, completely calm. For 34 years, you held all the power in our family. You decided who was valuable, who deserved respect, who had potential. You made those decisions based on your limited understanding of how the world was changing. Andrew tried a different approach. Rachel, we're family. We made mistakes, sure, but we're here now. We want to make things right. Do you, Andrew? Because 3 weeks ago, when Dad was humiliating me at Thanksgiving dinner, you sat there in silence. When he called my life's work a fantasy, when he accused me of lying about my success, you didn't say a word. Now that you need something from me, suddenly we're family. Dad's mask finally slipped completely. What do you want, money and apology? What's it going to take to end this nonsense? I want you to understand something that apparently escaped you all these years, I said, my voice steady and clear. I didn't build Privasec to prove anything to you. I didn't sell it for $58 million to get your attention. I accomplished all of that despite you, not because of you. And now, by the most delicious twist of fate, your entire livelihood depends on something you once called worthless. I stood up, leaving my untouched water glass on the table. Your accounts will be restored tomorrow morning, but understand this, from now on, when Monroe Insurance and Midwest Financial Partners use Privasec's services, you'll do so knowing that every encrypted email, every secure transaction, every protected client communication flows through systems I designed, platforms I built, technology I created while you were busy dismissing my potential. Dad started to speak, but I held up my hand. I don't need your pride now, Dad. I don't need your approval or your validation. What I have is something much more valuable, the knowledge that I was right about everything, and you were catastrophically wrong. Every time you log into your system, every time you process a secure communication, you'll remember this moment. You'll remember that the daughter you threw out of your house became the person your business can't survive without. I walked toward the restaurant exit, then turned back one final time. Oh, and Dad, the next time you're tempted to dismiss someone's dreams as unrealistic, remember that your company's entire future now depends on one of those computer fantasies you love to mock. The last thing I saw was Douglas Monroe's face, pale, stunned, and finally understanding that the power dynamic in our family had shifted permanently and irreversibly. As I stepped into the cool evening air, I realized I felt something I'd never experienced before: complete and utter freedom from needing anything from them ever again. The revenge was perfect because it wasn't really revenge at all. It was just the natural consequence of their own choices, playing out in a world that had moved far beyond their understanding. Thank you so much for listening to this story of triumph over family doubt and dismissal. I'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening to this story right now? Are you at home, commuting, or maybe taking a break from your own challenging family dynamics? Please leave a comment below, sharing your thoughts and your own experiences with family expectations and following your dreams, despite the doubters. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real-life revenge stories and share your thoughts about whether Rachel's response was justified or if she should have taken a different approach.